And afterwards, we're going to make it available to the people who maybe are joining late or, have to leave a bit early or weren't able to attend this morning. So we will be doing that. And with me this morning, I have three wonderful panelists, and I'll let them introduce themselves to you in a moment. But the purpose of today's call is to focus on questions about healthy aging, living with a chronic disease, and what it means to kind of move through the aging process. So the style of this morning's event is going to be question and answer style. So as I said before, I'm going to ask everybody to stay on mute. It's just going to keep everything running smoothly to make sure there's no feedback loops or anything like that, just because working with technology can sometimes be a bit messy. So we're just going to try and keep it as orderly as possible. You've probably seen, for those of you who are on this call, you've probably seen that we've been sending out emails asking you to submit your questions. Thank you to those of you who have done. I've got them collected here. And I have them divided, these questions, into 4 different categories. So the first category we'll work on, or the questions I'll ask are just focused on what it is to age healthily, what it means to kind of progress through your life. We have some questions about memory, a couple questions about exercise and physical activity for older age, and we also have several questions related to nutrition. So, like I said before, there are lots of submitted questions, and I'm going to make sure that we get to as many of them as possible. If you're on this call and you think of something and you didn't submit it, you are more than welcome to put it in the Zoom chat. If you have your email up, you can send an email to either Anna, Marla, or Rochelle, and they will definitely pass your question along to me. I want to make sure that every question gets asked, so I'm going to do my best to work with the time that we have. So I believe that that's all of housekeeping, all of my sort of spiel. I'm going to go ahead and ask each of our panelists today to just give a 2 to 3 sentence brief overview of who you are, what your expertise is in, and maybe a fun fact about yourself. Kirsten Emerson, can we start with you?
Shoot, I didn't have time to come up with a fun fact about myself. I'm going to have to be honest. That's too bad. I can't lie that quickly. So I'm Kirsten Emerson. It's nice to see everyone today. I know it's a dreary day, so I'm glad you all joined us. I'm a gerontologist here at the University of Georgia, which means that I study aging. I study it from everything that's non-medical and non-clinical. So I leave everything else to Dom over there, who's going to introduce himself in a second. I'm very glad to be here. And my fun fact is that I have a really, really messy house. And so I have this fake background behind me that makes me look like I'm really studious and scholarly. But really, it's that my house is very messy and I'm embarrassed. Welcome, everybody.
I love that. That's so funny. Thank you for being here, Kirsten. Dr. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be here this morning. So my name is Don Scott. I'm a professor of medicine at the medical school here in Athens. I'm an internal medicine doctor who specializes in geriatrics. And I've been working with ACCA for several years and always happy to participate in these events. And yeah, a fun fact was I was a rock drummer before I went to medical school.
Wow, I did not know that. That's an amazing fact. Thank you.
Yes, it's a hidden side of my personality.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Renee, why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about yourself?
Of course, hard to follow Don, but my name is Renee Brown. I'm a registered dietitian, and my current role, I serve as the chief dietitian for Georgia's Division of Aging Services. So this means I oversee programs like congregate meals in senior centers and home delivered meals. And previously I served as an outpatient primary care dietitian, working with individuals, especially with diabetes and hypertension at the Memphis VA. But my fun fact is I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I am not the best driver. I've actually ended up on railroad tracks and a golf course once. So I bike in Atlanta. If you see me on the road, you just kind of move over a little bit. I got you covered. Thanks for having me.
Noted. Thank you for sharing. And welcome to any of the new attendees. I saw a couple people jump on. I'm going to ask that you stay muted during this call to make sure that we're not picking up on any feedback loops or anything. With us today, again, we have Dr. Kirsten Emerson, studies gerontology at the University of Georgia. We have Dr. Don Scott, a registered geriatrician, and we have Renee Brown, who's chief dietitian. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to open up with some general questions just related to healthy aging. That's the topic of today's panel. And my first question is, what does healthy aging even mean? We're talking about this, that's the topic of today, but what does it mean to age healthily? What is healthy aging? Let's see, Dr. Scott, do you wanna go first?
No, sure, I'd be happy to. So when I hear the term healthy aging, it's also been called successful aging, but we don't really like to call it that because that means that people who don't age in a certain way perhaps are unsuccessful, and that's certainly not the case. Another way to think about it perhaps is optimal aging. But really, to me, what it means is being able to grow old in such a way where you are able to either live in the way that's best for your health and best to be able to preserve or to increase your independence, your functionality, and your quality of life. I think when we age, for almost all of us, and I'm 60 now, so I can speak a little bit to this, there are certainly things that happen with the body. Arthritis, stiff muscles. So healthy aging doesn't mean to be without any medical conditions or to be able to run a marathon when you're 80 years old. It means to be able to care for your health, both psychologically, socially, biologically, in such a way that you maximize your quality of life and to be able to do the things that you want to be able to do.
I love that answer. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Emerson, do you want to add anything to that, to what Don said?
Yeah, that's better than I could have possibly put it. So I appreciate that. I do think one of the key points in what he was saying is how individual it is for everybody. Everyone's definition is very different in what they consider healthy for them and what's most important to them and what they want to be able to do. So I think one of the kind of hallmarks of aging is, what is it that you want? What do you see as successful, positive, healthy, whatever the word is that you want to use that's buzzword like, but what is it that you want? What's most important to you?
I love that. I love the emphasis on it being unique to individuals. I think a lot of times, when we talk about medicine or aging, there's like sort of a box that people want to put themselves in. And really everybody is so unique, and the circumstances that we're living in are so different, which makes it aging an individual process. So thank you for highlighting that. Renee, is there anything you want to add to what healthy aging means?
Really just echoing that and adding on the holistic approach of aging, of course, our physical health, but our mental health and our social engagement, our community partnerships, how much, interaction we have with our friends, our families, our hobbies, really rounding out that healthy aging picture for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, now that we have an understanding of this term healthy aging, and it sounds like it's a big definition, that it's not, necessarily a one size fits all. We have the unique piece, we have the physical activity, we have the mental health, we have aging in a way that, works for you and is, successful for you and your circumstances. Related to aging, I have a question here. And it's, how can people free themselves of the myths and stereotypes of what it means to age and going through the aging process? So what things can people do to free themselves of the stereotypes that exist around getting older? And Dr. Emerson, I would like to start with you for that question.
Yeah, this is such a great question. I wish I had the magic answer, right? I think it's hard for all of us to know how to combat stereotypes that we know exist. I actually teach this quite a bit to my students who often have the stereotypes that don't even realize it. You open a magazine, you turn on the TV, there's horrible stereotypes all the time, but even within ourselves, we have some stereotypes that we hold, and it's really hard not to have those. I think that first step is whoever asked that question, you're already doing great, right? You already realize that there are these myths that exist, and it's, aging is not a very prescribed way that is, negative. The minute you wake up to be 65, you're all of a sudden the specific kind of person, and it's usually negative, right? So I think the first step is realizing that they exist in terms of battling it, kind of realizing your own stereotypes and others, knowing how to push those off. And maybe the second part is, and this kind of goes back to individual concepts of aging, is don't compare yourself to others, right? You have your own way of aging, and what others are doing might be their own path of aging. And so sometimes you don't want to say, I'm too old to learn this new trick, because old dogs can't learn new tricks. But you don't compare yourself to others. You just look at yourself and what you can do. And I wish it was easy to shake off stereotypes. It's not, right? They're so internalized. Media is a powerful tool, though. I've been reading a lot of studies that have been looking at ageism and media stereotypes especially, and they have gotten better. Not perfect by any means, but they have at least improved, I'd say, in the last 10 years or so. And I think some of that is, journalists are starting to use more appropriate language and not be as ageist. Movies are starting to represent older adults to be much more variety than this one cookie cutter version that we have. So I think it's getting better, but I think that first step is really acknowledging that they're myths. They're usually not good. The stereotypes are negative, and kind of battling that from within, but also realizing that they exist in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like what you said about, trying to not compare to other people. I remember something, I think it was, advice that I got early on as a young person. But I think it applies here. And it's like that comparison is the root of heartache. If you're constantly comparing to other people and judging yourself and holding yourself to these standards that either aren't realistic or, just don't make sense for your life, then you're always going to be, feeling let down and disappointed and maybe even ashamed, and where you shouldn't be. So thank you for adding to that. Dr. Scott, do you have anything that you'd like to add to that question of how people can free themselves from the myths or stereotypes around aging?
Well, yes, and certainly, education is the most important part of it. And, the being aware of what some of the stereotypes are. Where I come from is thinking about in this kind of topic is what are the myths that often physicians and patients and families themselves may have that they don't realize is actually a myth when it comes to healthcare. And so one of the big ones is that it's normal to have memory problems as you age. Now, a tiny bit of that is true. There are some issues of cognition that do decrease as we get older, but in general, the idea that, mom and dad can't remember things, or my husband or wife can't remember things, and that's a normal part of aging, leads to the lack of early diagnosis of people who do have severe cognitive problems. So, anyone who thinks that they're just not as sharp as they used to be, or especially if there's problems with memory, repeating things, we don't want to just write that off to the aging process. I think another big myth, and this is true really with physicians as much as it is with patients, is that old age and retirement is a time to physically slow down and to sort of get in the rocking chair, and actually the very opposite is true, that as we age we need to either maintain or increase our physical activity to be able to maintain our function. So those are two of the bigger myths that I deal with in terms of educating physicians, medical students, and patients and families themselves. So that's what I would have to add on that.
Thank you for adding that. And in your answer, I'm looking over here at the different questions that were submitted by the attendees, and we're definitely going to unpack questions related to how much physical activity somebody over 50 really should be getting, questions about memory and screening and all of that. So thank you for bringing that up, and we're definitely going to follow up on that in more detail as we go through the questions. Before I move on, Renee, is there anything that you can think of that you would like to add to the question about how people can free themselves from some stereotypes or myths around aging?
Absolutely. I think what we've covered so far and what my colleagues mentioned is all those things that are out there and constantly coming at us in terms of media, So one thing that I really encourage my participants and colleagues to do is surround yourself with people that mirror what you want to see in aging, whether that's getting active in a club or a community or a hobby. Bring those people to the front so that that is your image of what healthy aging looks like.
Yes, I love that. That put a big smile on my face, and I think that's something that, Athens Community Council on Aging is doing really well, with the Center for Active Living. And, a lot of people on this call are part of that, group. And so it is exciting to hear that. And I totally agree. Surround yourself with people that, you want in your life and that, uplift you and keep the negative stereotypes at bay. So I really appreciate that answer. Looking here at my question, so this is a bit specific, and Dr. Scott, this is going to be more and more for you, but would you explain what a geriatrician is and whether or not somebody should see one, what the benefits of a geriatrician is, how is a geriatrician different from a regular primary care provider? So could you please weigh in on that?
Yeah, sure. I just want to be sure I'm unmuted. Yeah. So this is one that I'm teaching to the medical students and residents all the time. It's easy to think about what a cardiologist is, right? They're a doctor of the heart, or to think about, what an orthopedist is. They take care of bones. It's harder to think about what a geriatrician is. So let me begin by telling you what a geriatrician is not. So a geriatrician is not the doctor that everyone over 65 needs to see. There are tens of millions of people over 65, and there are only about 5,000 licensed geriatricians in the United States. So, but who the geriatrician is for is, in my opinion, anyone age-wise that's 80, 85 or over, because there are changes that occur in the body physiologically and biologically with aging that someone needs to be expert in when treating people of advanced age. So an example of that would be, how do we deal with medicines in someone who's 85 years old? What do they really need? What do they perhaps not need so much? What are the drug interactions? So that's an example of an age criteria for, who should see a geriatrician, and I would say at least once. The other criteria is somebody who's 60, 65 and over that has multiple complicated medical problems, a complicated medical situation that is really affecting function and quality of life. And very often, it's not only the person has multiple biological problems, multiple medical conditions, but also may have issues of mental health and social needs as well. And we refer to that as the biopsychosocial aspect of care and of medicine. So the way I could say it very succinctly is somebody who's 60, 65 and over and has multiple complicated problems. And the reason a geriatrician is able to deal better with that is a geriatrician is specifically trained not only in the common medical problems that occur with aging, for instance, dementia, urinary incontinence, the control of pain, polypharmacy, but also we have additional training in knowing about things like how to help families with transitions of care, from living independently to assisted living to things like this. And then we have extra training in the psychological issues of aging, like depression. And so that's really who needs to see the geriatrician. And a geriatrician can be a primary care or a specialist. And you can always ask your primary care doctor for a geriatrics referral, even if it's for just one visit, just to see if there's anything additionally that can be done to help the patient and or the family. Because just like in pediatrics, geriatric care emphasizes the family as well as the patient. So that's my mini lecture on that topic.
No, that's amazing. And I'm over here learning so much more about what it means to be a geriatrician. I didn't realize how multifaceted it was, and just, the services or sort of the types of care that are provided. So thank you for shedding light on that. It does sound like it is something that is multi-pronged and does help in a lot of different ways.
And I want to say just two other things. So the first thing is that a geriatrician or geriatrics refers to the medical doctor, healthcare of aging. And what Dr. Emerson does is gerontology, which is the PhD academic study of aging. So yeah, so I'm a geriatrician and she's a gerontologist. She's a gerontologist, and those two terms are often confused.
Yeah, very different. Thank you for pointing that out. Dr. Emerson, related to that, is there anything that you'd like to add maybe about how your line of work is different from Dr. Scott's line of work?
No, I was actually going to jump in with that as well. You know, if you are having any sort of medical issues, for the love of God, please don't ask me about it. I will just refer you to Don because I don't know. So I am a PhD, I'm an academic, and I study things. I can talk to you about Medicare and Medicaid and some of the social impacts, but please, if you ever have any medical issues, a gerontologist is not the way to go. And it is really difficult. The words sound almost exactly the same. If you even know one or the other, I'm surprised, because either word is really uncommon in people's vocabulary. And so I love that we're even just talking about it, defining it. So many people don't know that geriatrics is an option, right? We don't hear that word very often. So I'm really glad that Don explained what it is, but also that we're hearing the word, because I think the more you hear it and the more you know that it's an option, yeah, you can ask for a referral. Did you know that you could do that? I think we have a little bit of a marketing issue sometimes with that. You know, we also have a shortage of them, so we need some more Dons. We need to, you know, multiply him. But I love that we're even just defining it and talking about what it is, so that people know that there's a geriatrician as an option.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if there's no awareness, then people can't take action. So it starts with things like this. And again, thank you, all of you, for being here to sort of shed light on this, because this is not my world of research. I study health communication, so I certainly can't speak to the differences between what a gerontologist is and what a geriatrician is. So thank you. Renee, I know that you are not a gerontologist and you're not a geriatrician. However, you do help people with their nutrition and providing guidance related to that. So my question for you is, does your work ever overlap with somebody who is either a gerontologist or a geriatrician? And if so, how? And how does your work overlap or complement the works of gerontologists or geriatricians?
Absolutely. I think one thing that's fun to point out that many people may be unaware of is that dietitians actually specialize as well. You can be a dietitian who is specialized in training in diabetes or perhaps pediatric care. And just along those same lines, you can be a geriatric dietitian. And those individuals have more training, as Don mentioned, specifically in the world of eating. We work with the physiological changes that happen as we age in terms of how that affects how we age and eat. So things like dentures, you know, how do we change the textures of our foods to make sure we're getting everything in? Digestive issues, you know, are we having difficulty? Perhaps we can work with some kind of therapeutic diet to help you get what you need in an easier way. So I tip my hat off to the gerontologists and the geriatricians of the world. I do think for the general public, if you're working with a dietitian, they will know your needs, but you'll often find geriatric dietitians in Veterans Affairs, VAs, different hospitals and community settings. So if you're looking for that, those are some good resources that you have, and they can really do well to work hand in hand with your primary care team.
That is awesome, and I had no idea. So again, I'm learning new things here. I feel like I'm benefiting from this panel as well. I'm not just asking questions, I'm actually learning things. So this is great. I'm so excited to be hearing all of this from you. I want to transition a little bit. So those are the three sort of general starting questions. I'm happy that we now have a better working definition for, you know, what healthy aging is, the differences between gerontologists and geriatricians, how nutrition plays a role in the fact that nutrition trained experts can focus in on the older stage and sort of the needs that older people might have when it comes to nutrition. So I want to transition here, and I want to focus on questions related to memory. And Dr. Scott, you brought this up earlier in your answer to one of the questions about myths and stereotypes of aging. My first question is is two questions in one. And again, we can open this up to everybody, but Dr. Scott, I'd like to start with you. My question is memory loss really part of natural aging? And what are some early signs that my memory is getting worse beyond what is considered normal?
Right. As soon as my cat gets done eating, I'll answer that question. So,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
no, that's okay. So first of all, there's been a lot of studies done about this, and this is something that Dr. Emerson knows a lot about as well, I'm sure, as well as Dr. Page. So what I would say is there's a lot of research basically that shows that one of the things that does decrease as we get older is our ability to multitask and to direct our attention rapidly between different tasks. So that does decrease. So what would an example of that be? Well, an example of that might be being on this Zoom call, but at the same time trying to take notes about something else. That would be a multitasking type of situation. The data on short and long-term memory, as far as I know, really does not show that there's a significant decrease. So let me just define short and long-term memory. I always like to say short-term memory is asking somebody at night what they had for breakfast this morning. And long-term memory is, where did you go to grade school? What was the name of your grade school? The other thing that does decrease, and I can certainly endorse this now, it's really cool, by the way, to be entering old age as a geriatrician and actually to begin to experience some of these things myself. So the ability to rapidly recall names, for instance, of an actor that you knew very well, that's a normal change of aging. Or not to be able to really quickly recall that word that you've used frequently, throughout your life. Now, what's not normal, however, is to not be able to remember the faces or names of people that you know very well. It's not normal to ask the same question, 3 times during an hour or 2 hours. That is not normal. And certainly we do have screening tests, which I know we'll talk about later. So there are some sort of, I would just call it mild changes in memory or in cognition, really, which is a better way to think about this, because our brains do a whole lot of other things besides just memory. Some mild changes that do happen with aging, but not, severe ones, or ones that you would think, oh my, there's something kind of going on or wrong here.
Right, that makes sense. And I think too, I'm happy that we were able to ask this question because, I think, like you said, there are some more normal things that come along. I appreciate your breaking down of short and long-term memory. And I think talking about what is normal and okay and something to be expected as somebody gets older, and then really contrasting that with things that stand out as possible warning signs. So thank you for elaborating on that. Dr. Emerson, is there anything that you would like to add related to memory loss as being part of aging, and or what things maybe stand out as something that signifies a bigger problem?
I mean, I think he explained it incredibly well. And I know it's one of the biggest worries for people. I'm sure Don hears the question all the time, is this normal? Am I normal? Is what I'm going through normal? Should I be worried? So it's the kind of thing that is good to talk about. A lot of people get really nervous and worry and then don't want to talk to their doctor about it because they're scared. So I encourage people just to, to talk to the family members if they're worried, but mostly talk to their doctor if they're worried. So at least they can get a baseline and explain what is normal, what's not. Should you be worried? Should you be getting a screening test or not?
Yeah, definitely. And Renee, I do have a question for you. I know that you're likely not an expert in memory or aging in the way that Don and Kirsten are. However, I do, and I have seen, on like either social media or on TV, things like take these vitamins, take these supplements, they will improve your memory. And as somebody who specializes in nutrition and sort of vitamins and supplements, and sort of that world, can you explain whether or not those things, those marketing, vitamins or supplements, are they legitimate, or maybe is it just to kind of get money and maybe instill a bit of fear in people?
Absolutely. As Dr. Emerson mentioned earlier, having this magic potion to solve all of the issues would be so nice. And I think I'd be first in line to get it, perhaps. But what the research is telling us currently, especially as it comes to aging and healthy eating and keeping our minds functioning well, what we've found overall is having a healthy mind means having a healthy body. So often the dietary patterns that we find work for high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, all of those things actually keep our bodies in a very good state to help our mind. And two examples that come up often are the Mediterranean dietary pattern and a newer dietary pattern called the Mind diet. And I can certainly elaborate, but know that these are focused on a few things. First is whole grains and a lot of fiber. The second is polyphenols. These are things that we find in fruits and vegetables, those micronutrients. And then, of course, unsaturated fatty acids, so the things that we find in nuts and oils and fish. So when you picture a Mediterranean dietary pattern, you probably think that fish and the olive oil and maybe a little bit of wine here and there. But know that those are very research-based, evidence-based wellness dietary patterns that have shown very good results for keeping our bodies optimally healthy. And in terms of a supplement, truthfully, it really depends. There are some really good research studies, especially at the University of Georgia, in looking at specific nutrients like lutein and how that may impact cognitive function. But ultimately, you want to check with your primary care provider in terms of ever taking a supplement, because we want to make sure that it's not interacting with any current medications you're on and that you're not taking something that you don't need. Because most often we can get what we need through the sun with vitamin D and otherwise through our diet.
Right, that makes
I
total
could,
sense. Oh, go ahead.
Jessica,
Sorry.
if I could, I just wanted to say one other thing. If you're at all concerned about your memory or the memory of a loved one, and you go to your physician's office and say, hey, doc, I'm a little concerned about my memory or about my wife's memory or my mother's memory, and they tell you not to worry about it because that's what happens with aging, you need to go to a different doctor, right? And so we often don't hear doctors talking in negative terms about other physicians, and I certainly don't mean to do that. But it's very easy to be screened for significant cognitive impairment or dementia. And anyone who doesn't take you seriously about your concerns about yourself or loved ones, you need to seek out another physician or at least a geriatric consultant.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I think I have a follow-up question related to that. But before I ask that, going back to what Renee was saying about the diet and sort of what we're eating, if I can sort of paraphrase what I've heard, because again, I'm learning a great deal here as well, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding this. So what I hear from this conversation is that improving memory or diet related to your brain health, it doesn't sound like there's a one specific vitamin or supplement that's going to boost somebody's short-term memory or long-term memory, maybe despite what an ad is saying. It sounds like this is more of a holistic change across many different areas of the person's diet, mental health, and physical exercise. So thank you for explaining that. And I think, did I get that right? Thumbs up if I got that. Yes, perfect, awesome. And now I want to transition a little bit to follow up on something you just said, Dr. Scott, about maybe navigating, trying to find a physician who maybe would take you seriously if you did come and say, I think I'm a little bit concerned about something that's going on, or I'm concerned about my mom or dad. And the physician says, that's part of normal aging, don't worry about it. Now, as somebody, so my area of expertise is in this navigation that patients often have to deal with when they're working with their physician, and sort of barriers or facilitators to those kinds of conversations. Now, I in my experience and from working with others who have had sort of run-ins with their physicians, is that it can be very scary and embarrassing to say, actually, I think you're wrong and I would like to see somebody else. Like trying to explain to your physician and stand up and sort of make sure that you're getting what you're looking for can be really challenging. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as somebody who is a geriatrician and likely has to educate other physicians about the stereotypes about what it means to age and changes in memory, do you have any advice for things that a patient could say to their physician if their doctor says, don't worry about it, you don't need to get screened, this is what happens as you get older. So can you speak to that a little bit more and maybe share some recommended strategies or how to go about even looking for a new physician to go to?
Well, yeah, sure. And I think that's really a great question. I think the first thing is that many people, especially older people, have very long established relationships with their primary care physician. And if that's the case, I think it's extremely rare, maybe extremely rare, maybe is not the right word, maybe just rare, but it's not common for physicians to not respond to requests from patients, especially those that they've had long established relationships. And certainly you don't want to give up a physician who you've had a long established relationship with, a good one, someone who you trust. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is it's extremely important before you go into your doctor's visit to the doctor's office to have written down the things that you either want to ask about or the strategies that you want to employ. So for instance, if someone came to me and said, you know, Dr. Scott, well, let me back up. At the beginning of the office visit, the physician will often say to you, so, you know, Mrs. Smith, how are you doing today? And, you know, if Mrs. Smith has written down, well, you know, Dr. Scott, I've been feeling pretty well, but I do have some concerns about my memory that have really been bothering me. So writing down just that phrase, exactly what you want to say, is the way to go about it. And the second thing is that I would say that if you have a physician that is a good doc, they don't mind you, you know, following up, challenging them a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, Dr. Scott, yeah, no, I get it that this maybe could be a part of aging, but this does actually kind of bother me a bit. And so I would, you know, I would really appreciate if maybe you could just do a screening test, or is there somebody you could refer me to? One of the biggest pressures on physicians, and especially primary care physicians, is time. And there are often many older people that have other competing medical issues that the physician feels they should deal with in that visit. So if the physician says, you know, well, Mrs. Smith, I really think this is just part of aging and we don't really need to worry about this, or something along those lines. You know, you can always say, well, would it be possible for me to have a visit to come in just to be screened for this problem? Or you could ask for a referral. I really respect you, Dr. Scott, in your opinion, but would it be okay for me perhaps to go see a neurologist or a geriatrician to have this further looked at, to be further evaluated? So those are some of the suggestions that I would make. And to have a family member there also to ask and to request at the same time. So if it's your dad, right, and you're the daughter, and you can bring in another daughter or another sibling or anybody else, the more people that ask for something for a patient, the more likely you are to get something done. So that's kind of a sneaky way to do it, but those are my ideas.
I love those ideas. And for the people who, you know, maybe have been coming to these calls or these support groups, you know, the strategies that you mentioned, writing things down, practicing sort of the polite, you know, I really respect your opinion. However, I still would like to, you know, would you maybe give me recommendations for a neurologist, or bringing that social support with you, somebody to, you know, maybe speak up if you're feeling like, oh, I'm a bit nervous too. Maybe you're not the type of person who feels comfortable sort of voicing concern or standing up to somebody and sort of holding your ground. So having people there, I really like those strategies. And I think too, again, I'm very happy that we have this recording available and that, you know, we have notes being taken to send out to other people, because those strategies can be hard to remember, and having them down to revisit and look at multiple times, it really does, even from like a scientific perspective, does really improve the interactions that people do have with their physicians. So thank you for bringing that up. Anno, did you have a question? Nope. Okay, sorry. I think my little feedback loop was happening. Okay. Related to also to memory and screening and things that are maybe available locally. And we can open this up to, you know, the folks who are familiar with UGA a bit more. Is screening, what does screening for memory impairment or just general cognition screening, what does that look like? What does that involve? Do you have to pay for it? Is this something that is free? And locally in the Georgia area, what is available for people to go and get screened? Like what does that process look like? Can we expand a bit on that? Dr. Emerson, can we go to you first for that?
Sure, I'm going to definitely just punt this right off on Dr. Scott for this one.
I know.
I actually appreciate that you are going through the steps, because I think one of the things that makes people nervous is they don't know what to expect. They don't even know what to ask for. So I love that Dr. Scott just said what you're asking for is a screening tool or a referral to a neurologist or a geriatrician. Because when you're worried about your memory, you're worried and you're scared. You don't necessarily know who to ask for, what to ask for. And then when you do ask for it, you don't know what to expect. And that can make people really nervous. What does a memory screener look like? Am I getting put in an MRI machine? Am I asking questions? Am I reciting the Pledge of Allegiance, right? What are you going to ask me to do? And so I like that Don is about to very detailed step-by-step go through what to expect, because you're nervous already about your memory. You might be careful, kind of, or cautious about even mentioning it. So you want to know what you're about to get into. And for some things, I know if I talk to my doctor about, I don't know, diabetes, I know that I'm probably going to get my blood drawn or something where you might know what the next step is. Or if I think I have a broken bone, that's probably a better example. I know I'm going to get an x-ray and I kind of know what to expect there. And I've probably had some experience with that, or I've had other people, but memory is not something that you might have any experience with, memory screening and tests. And so I love that you asked this question, and that I'm going to put it over this way because on my Zoom screen, that's where Dr. Scott is, but wherever he is for you, I'm going to put it over to Dr. Scott.
Perfect.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Kirsten, very much. So what I would say is, let me just go back to the previous question 1 second, because there's one other thing I want to say. And that is, a lot of folks, I think, are under the impression that they cannot call up a specialist's office and request an appointment without the approval of their primary care physician. And that's certainly not the case. It's always better to have your primary care doc on board with the plan and referring you. But, and again, there's some exceptions depending on what your insurance is, but it's, for many people, you can actually directly call a neurologist's office or a geriatric doctor's office and ask for an appointment because you're concerned about your memory. So don't just assume that you can't directly call a specialist and get an appointment. And that would be the first thing I would say. The second thing about the screening process is just to have me just tell you real quick what screening means. What screening means is basically that some sort of test is going to be performed to detect whether or not you may have a certain condition. Not for sure that you do have, but you know that you may have that condition. So when we talk about screening for memory problems, cognitive impairment, dementia, what we're talking about is basically in the physician's office, and it doesn't have to be administered by a physician. It can be done by a nurse who's been trained, a physician's assistant, a nurse practitioner. Is basically you're going to be asked a series of questions over about 10 minutes that test memory, that test your ability to recognize objects, to say certain words, to perhaps draw a little figure. These are all the things that are involved in cognition. And so that is what screening means when we're talking about screening for what's now called major, what is it, Kirsten, major neurocognitive impairment. There's a new word for dementia now because dementia is such a nasty, awful sounding word. But in basically dementia means that you're having problems not only in memory, but in other aspects of cognition as well. And we can talk more about that if you want to, but the screening test is basically a questionnaire that takes anywhere from maybe 7 to 12 minutes or so to go through in a doctor's office.
Thank you for explaining that. Again, I'm learning this as well, and it's really I really appreciate going through the different steps, because, like was brought up in the beginning of this talk, lacking awareness of it and sort of not knowing what's out there it ends up adding to the fear and anxiety that people might have about what this whole thing is. So I really appreciate getting into the fine details about what's involved in screening, and what things are quote normal versus abnormal. So I really appreciate this the expansion on things related to memory and getting older and all of that. So with that, those are my questions related to the memory side of things. I'm going to transition, and it looks like we're about halfway through, so this is perfect timing. My last two sections of questions are focused on exercise and physical care, as well as, let's say, mental health as well. And then I also have several questions related to nutrition. So focusing first, I'm just going by my list here. What's next for me are things related to exercise and physical activity. Now, my first question is related to sleep. And I'm wondering if you weigh in on how much sleep somebody who's over 50 should actually be getting, and maybe talking about how sleep changes or might change as somebody gets older. I'm not sure who to go to first. Dr. Scott, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, sure. I'll give it my best. I'll give it my best shot. So there is no question that sleep changes as people age. And unfortunately, it often does not change for the better. So what studies have shown is basically that people as they age, and by as they age, I mean especially as you're getting to 60, 65, 70, 80, basically you do not sleep as deeply, and it's easier to be awakened in the night by a little noise or moving in bed. So sleep is often fragmented. The biggest thing I want to say about sleep is, number one, it is a problem. And if you're having a problem with it, really you need to speak to your doc about it, because having good sleep is really important. As having as good a sleep as you can have, I would say, is extremely important, not only for physical health, but for mental health as well. The second thing I want to say about the sleep and the treatment of sleep disorders is that some of it is not what we think of as simple insomnia. So there are things like restless leg syndrome. There are things like sleep apnea that some of you may heard about that need to be considered and need to be checked for. And again, there are simple screening questionnaires that can be used in a primary care physician's office to look for these other sorts of disorders apart from usual insomnia of aging. Another thing I'd like to say is that all of the sleep medications that are on the market that are advertised so widely are all addictive, and they can all lead to other problems, and because they all sedate. So for instance, falling during the night, decreases in cognition. So the answer to sleep problems is not necessarily pills. They can be used for a short period of time, but should never be used for a long period of time, especially in people of advanced age. And there are non-pharmacologic ways to help with insomnia and sleep that can be tried and that should be employed. And any of these topics that we're talking about, you can ask your primary care physician for handouts or literature. They may have that. And if you have a computer and you know how to surf the internet, use the web, you can enter in a search term like treatment for insomnia in older adults and find a huge amount of information about that. And one of the things that I'm thinking that would be helpful, Jessica, is that I can send some links and resources to you that maybe you could distribute to the group on some of the topics we're talking about, and we can send that out as well. The last thing I wanted to say about sleep is that one of the simple strategies to try to help sleep at night is to try to avoid napping in the day and to stay physically active. If I can say one thing to everyone on this call about aging and how to best age. It's to stay physically active as much as you can. That doesn't mean you have to go out and jog. If physical activity for you means sitting down in a chair and doing some leg lifts and just doing this kind of stuff with your arms, it's important to do something. So
yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's awesome. And you know, one of my questions later on is going to be related to physical activity and what that looks like. But before we transition here, Renee, I'd love to hear from you. Related to diet and what a person is eating, how does diet affect sleep patterns? And are there foods that people should gravitate towards that, you know, maybe promote sleep? You know, I'm thinking again about these vitamins and supplements that say promotes healthy sleep. Or are there things that people should be avoiding throughout the day that maybe hamper somebody's ability to fall asleep or stay asleep? So I'll let you expand on that.
Sure. I can offer a little bit of insight on this. And I think one of the most important things we see, and perhaps patterns as we age, is a lack of consistent intake throughout the day. And if we don't get enough consistently, what we may find is a prevalence of feeling really hungry at night and having that late night snack. And for whatever reason, it seems to be a lot of us like a sugary cereal, like a Cocoa Puffs that we kind of grab at night. And gosh darn it, I don't know how we got there, but it's very common. So while I can't speak specifically to one certain thing to point to when you're looking for ways to improve your sleep, there's a lot of different opinions out there about intermittent fasting and what's the latest you should eat. But if I could give you any advice, perhaps managing your blood sugar is a very important thing to remember. So if you're having a snack, perhaps after dinner, make sure if you have a carbohydrate, like a piece of fruit or perhaps a grain, you pair it with a protein, which is something like a couple pieces of cheese, perhaps some nut butter, some nuts, or even a hard-boiled egg. Having that carbohydrate plus that protein can give you a little bit of energy, but also that satiety. So while that may or may not help you sleep, it's really important to not be loading up on carbohydrates right before you're going to sleep, because you want to make sure you're managing your blood sugar. And I can, of course, hand it back to Don if he has any other specifics about that, but certainly keeping that managed and avoiding that late night snacking that may affect you overall.
Yes, late night snacking. That is something I struggle with for sure. Dr. Scott, anything to add in follow up to what Renee just said?
Sure. I mean, there are some other, tips that are given for the non-pharmacologic management of sleep that are usually easy to follow. Now, I should say that there are certain populations where these sorts of things don't apply, but for most people they do. So a simple one, a lot of people get up during the night to have to urinate, or they awake at night and feel the urge to have to urinate and think, oh, I'm getting up because I have to urinate. So those two things are not easy always to sort out, but a lot of us have to get up at night to go use the bathroom. 1 or 2 times, especially for men, is not abnormal as we age because of prostate issues. But if you're having to get up 3 and 4 and 5 times at night, that's not good. So first, the thing I'd say is that if you're having problems with urination at night, urinary incontinence, anything like that, see your doctor. The second thing is that it's a good idea not to be drinking caffeinated beverages after 4 or 5 p.m. And it's a good idea not to be drinking a whole lot of anything in the hour or 2 hours before you have to go to bed. I mean, you can take sips of water. I don't mean don't drink anything at all, but not sitting there and drinking a glass of tea or a Coke or a Diet Coke or whatever you drank. So in terms of the nutrition and, fluids part of that, that's one thing I think that I could add to that.
Thank you. Dr. Emerson, is there anything that you think you want to add to that before we
I'm just so disappointed to hear that the Cocoa Puffs are not an appropriate bedtime snack.
Oh, darn it.
Yeah, only if you buy the Diet Cocoa Puffs. and don't put any milk in it, just eat them dry.
Fair enough. Okay, so something that was touched upon a little bit in this last answers to the last question is energy levels. I have a question here about how do I improve my energy levels? And Renee, I'd really like to start with you on that because you were the one who mentioned, you know, energy and things related to what you're eating and how that can affect your energy levels. So I'm going to turn that question to you first.
Absolutely. And I think this question has two main answers to it. The first is, I hinted at it earlier, but maintaining consistent intake. And I mention this in particular because as we age, we might notice that our appetite changes. And that's okay, as long as we're aware of what works for us. There isn't a set number of meals that you have to have in a day. Of course, we'd like you to have about 2 or 3 with some snacks in between, but really finding what works for you can perhaps be the best way to go. And so when it comes to maintaining your energy levels, every time you get a meal or snack in, you want to get as many nutrient-dense items as possible. And I want to give you one fast tool that can help with this. It's called the plate method. And we can get into it a little bit further, but it's really one tool that can help you stay balanced and getting those nutrient-dense foods in throughout the day. And here's how it works. Anytime you have a meal, you want to balance your plate in the following manner. So picture a standard plate, right? About half of it should be filled with non-starchy foods. These are things like leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, other items that you enjoy like Brussels sprouts or anything that's mostly a leafy green, non-starchy vegetable. That's half of your plate. A quarter of your plate should be devoted to starchy foods. These are things like whole grains, the pasta, the rice, any kind of whole grain when you can get it is best. And then the next section is your lean proteins. So those are things like fish, meats, other proteins like plant-based proteins like edamame or soy. But the point is, if you keep that balance, you're going to be giving your body what it needs to really create that whole picture. And that's one thing. So getting the right things in. And the second thing is managing your hunger and fullness cues. Keep an eye of when you're hungry. Oftentimes we may skip meals, or perhaps we just don't get something in because we feel like we shouldn't be eating. And that's your body telling you, hey, it needs a little bit of something. So if I could really drive home those energy levels, 1, getting the right nutrients in consistently, and 2, managing your hunger and fullness cues. And that also applies to thirst. Getting that hydration in throughout the day is something we don't always love to do, but keeping an eye on it can help you with those energy levels.
Thank you. I do have a slight follow-up question. What is a nutrient-dense food? What does that word mean?
I love that you asked this because honestly, when we think about nutrients and nutrient density, you know, we often have different pictures of what that really looks like. But for us, we want to think about what gives us the most bang for our buck. So in terms of a carbohydrate, there are many things that are carbohydrates. We have sugar as a carbohydrate. We have starches as a carbohydrate, like fruit. And then we also have fiber, which is also a carbohydrate. But which one of those is going to give us the most? So in this instance, if I'm choosing a carbohydrate and I have a choice between a cup of soda and an apple's going to pack some fiber, some micronutrients, a lot of the really good things that we need, and also serve as a carbohydrate source. Whereas our soda is just going to be a carbohydrate source, mostly made of sugar. Doesn't really have the fiber, doesn't have those micronutrients that we want. So figuring out what those nutrient-dense food choices are really where we go towards. So as dietitians, we stop using the word healthy, because what really means healthy, but nutrient-dense, trying to find something. And when it comes down to it, finding something with fiber in it is often your best pick. A fruit or a vegetable or a legume, something like that can give you a lot of bang for your buck.
Thank you for explaining that. Yeah, I think sometimes the words that are used to refer to things are oftentimes taken for granted by people who are really sort of saturated in that area. So I always like to make sure that we can, you know, define the words that we're using in reference to things like food. So thank you for explaining that. Related to energy level, I'd like to just broadly throw that to the other panelists. It doesn't necessarily have to refer to nutrition. Maybe there's something in the literature about spirituality or seeing friends or something like that. So Dr. Emerson, do you have any advice related to energy level and how to maintain it or how to keep that up?
Yeah, so I'm going to go the non-clinical, non-physiological route, right? Thinking, again, our mind-body connection, it's all connected. And for many of us, energy level is also associated with something we're excited about, kind of a purpose in life, a meaning of something. So You know, when you have like a wedding that weekend, you know, you're excited, you go to it, you wake up more excited because you're going to see friends and family. And obviously we can't have exciting events all the time, but having something in your life that gives you meaning that you look forward to is a little harder in the time of COVID and making sure we're all staying socially distanced. But I know for a lot of people, for instance, church or activities like that are really important, and they can get you excited and kind of a little more energized. I know sometimes I have a really great phone call with somebody and I end it and I feel really good and kind of pepped and pumped because I just had this really great call. So sometimes even just a phone call can give you that little extra pep. For many people, pets can really make a difference like that. That can nicely tie into physical activity sometimes, depending on the kind of pet. So I have a shelter dog who needs to be walked a lot more than I ever expected. When we got him, he was supposed to be very docile and calm, and he is not. But it has made me get up every day, and I have to take long walks with him. And it's good physically, but it's also really good for me. I have a purpose. I want to take care of this dog. I want to take care of this animal who needs a lot of everything. But sometimes we just need that purpose or that excitement in our lives to kind of get our mental energy going as well. Because a lot of times it's, you know, it's all connected. And so if we have a mental energy, that can really help with our physical as well.
Totally agree. Thank you for bringing that up. Dr. Scott, is there anything that you would like to add related to energy levels? This can be, you know, clinical related or not clinical, more spiritual energy, connecting with other people. Anything you want to add to maintaining energy levels?
No, I'd certainly endorse wholeheartedly and enthusiastically everything that Dr. Emerson just said. I think that is probably even more important than the physical or biological component. So a couple things I would say. One is that there is no medicine that is an energy pill. Okay. So, and certainly I can let hear from Dr. Brown on this as well, but there is no pep pill that you can get by going to the doctor. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that physical activity, again, is extremely important for maintaining your energy, right? Use it or lose it. And that applies to your energy levels as well. So you need to do something where you're using energy, as contradictory as this may sound. You need to do something where you're using energy to help build up more energy. So taking a walk, doing whatever you can do physically can help very much in maintaining your energy. Also, the physical activity is good for you psychologically as well, of course. And the last thing that I would say, which is more of on the line of a warning, if you're not only having decreased energy, but you may also not be sleeping very well, you don't feel like doing anything, you don't have any motivation anymore, you're gaining a lot of weight or losing a lot of weight, there's always the possibility of low energy being associated with depression. So you always have to consider that as a possibility as well. But for most people, low energy doesn't have to do with depression, but I did just want to mention that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I do want to follow up, you know, because we've talked about physical activity a little bit here. It's been brought up. My question is, how much exercise do people over 50 really need? And I imagine here from what I've heard that this is likely going to depend on how old the person is. So how much exercise should an older person be getting? Is this a daily thing? Is this a weekly thing? Is there like a finite number that we can put on it? And sort of related to that, what is the best kind of exercise that an older person should be getting? Dr. Scott, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to throw that back to you.
No, and I don't mind. And if you don't mind me asking Dr. Brown a question, I did want to ask her, and that has to do with foods and energy and that whole interaction. And I'd really love to know what your thoughts are about that.
Sure. So is your question more towards specific foods that you'd be looking for energy, or more how it impacts physical activity?
Yeah, for me, I think is there a diet that we can adhere to that will help us have more energy, or are there diets that are bad that if we take those diets or eat those foods, they're going to give us less energy?
Mm. Well, I can give a little bit of light just from a biological digestive state. I like to tell people, think of how you feel after you drink have some kind of packaged material that's typically high in sugar or carbohydrate. Usually you might find yourself feeling a little bit sluggish. You might not feel like you want to get up and go for a walk. And a lot of the times that can be due to our blood sugar going up. You know, we have that quick spike and perhaps it's falling back down. So really what I try to encourage people to do is get at least a carbohydrate and a protein together, because even if I want pretzels, let's take those. Pretzels can be a very good implement into your day, but we want to pair them with some kind of protein, because if we're just giving our body that carbohydrate, it's kind of like that fast energy, but we need that protein to really keep us full. So I always suggest, you know, what if you paired those pretzels with some peanut butter or a couple slices of cheese or some yogurt or cottage cheese, something like that, to really get you that fast energy, but also that satiety, so that you're not feeling that spike of going up and down. Does that make sense? So that's one key thing, but I don't know if that fully answers your question on how we really implement that, because to directly answer your question, there's not one diet that we as dietitians recommend to get energy pumped and ready to go, but maintaining those balances of macro and micronutrients is really giving your body what it needs to do that.
So perhaps perhaps things that really could decrease our energy would be, you know, drinking sugary drinks, eating very sugary types of things, eating just a lot at once. I know for me, you know, I try to avoid sugary drinks, but last night, and I'll fess up, was I ate half a package of jelly beans because I'm a jelly bean freak. And that was not good for my energy level, I'll tell you that. And yeah, and I know when I have big and heavy meals that really decreases my energy too. And those are just sort of, you know, common, I don't want to say common sense, but those are just, you know, sort of well-known things,
Absolutely.
I guess. I was just wondering what you thought about that, and you've already answered that, so I thank you. In terms of the physical activity question, I'm going to take a slightly different tact at this, as opposed to just giving you what the standard recommendations are for all adults. I've struggled with my weight all my life, and I was not raised to be physically active, and it's a chore and a job to me to be physically active. And so what I would say is any physical activity you can do at all is better than none. And certainly as people age, there are issues with pain, with different kinds of arthritis. You may have had a stroke, there may be neurological issues, other kinds of issues. So doing what you can do is the most important thing to do. Not worrying about whether you're doing what's recommended or not recommended. You know, if you can exercise at a moderate level for 30 minutes, 4 days a week, great. But if you can't, it does not mean that you shouldn't do anything, right? So you've all seen, I'm sure, or many of you have seen the exercises for people that have different kinds of impairments. And that might be sitting in a chair, doing leg exercises, arm exercises, just twisting your body in different ways. So I know on public television, you can find programs that are like that. For those that can walk, going out, walk 15 minutes a day, if you can do that. If you have a pet or a dog, and of course we have to be socially distanced, but one of the reasons pets, and especially dogs, help people live longer is, guess why? Because you got to go walk your dog unless your dog can use the litter box. And I haven't been able to train my dog to use a litter box, and most dogs don't. So you just got to do what you can. And that's what I would say. Don't give up on being physically active. And if you're 85 years old and you can go out and play 2 sets of tennis, by all means, please continue to do that.
Thank you for that. So what I heard is any physical activity is better than no physical activity, and to really pay attention and get to know your body and what works for you in your circumstance or situation. So thank you for elaborating on that. I am keeping an eye on the time, so I am going to transition away from the physical activity set of questions, and I want to dive in a bit more heavily into nutrition. So as I was collecting questions from the folks on this call, a lot came in related to diabetes and high blood pressure. So I have a sort of two-pronged question related to diabetes and high blood pressure. And the question is, what foods should I avoid if I have one of those conditions? And what foods should I gravitate towards? And Renee, I would love to start with you for that.
Sure, I'd love to start this question. And Dr. Emerson, did you have something to add on that last question before I go forward? Okay. I do want to start off by saying that all foods fit. I think when we get a diagnosis of diabetes or high blood pressure, we're so anxious to start taking things away and saying, I can't have these are on the red list. So I want you to approach your food in a manner that says, I can have things, I have to monitor my portions, and I want to keep them balanced. So in example of a diabetes and a hypertension plan, there's two different things that come into play with that. First, let's look at diabetes. Diabetes, we really focus on your carbohydrate intake, and those are things like grains and fruits and other sorts that would get you those carbohydrate dosages. And I'm not saying that you can't have those. When we work with patients who have diabetes, we want to make sure that they're getting consistent carbohydrate intake so that we avoid those lows that feel so miserable. So if you have a low blood sugar, you may find yourself feeling dizzy and shaky and not fun. And then on the other end of the spectrum, having a high, really getting too much carbohydrate in, that can really be devastating on the other end. So finding that Goldilocks effect of just enough carbohydrate and pairing it with things that I mentioned with that plate method, the protein, the fiber, really figure out what works for you and work with a registered dietitian or your primary care team to see what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, because everybody's different. In terms of hypertension or high blood pressure, as we call it, we always know that the biggest thing that we talk about is sodium intake. And I like to tell individuals that oftentimes, even if you're not adding salt to your food with a salt shaker, the manufacturers who are making your food are doing that for you. So the biggest scary things to moderate are fast food products. Any kind of restaurant meal usually has a lot of sodium in it. And also packaged products, so like those packaged chips. Looking for those things can really help you along the way. And I can elaborate more on that, but those are the biggest things that you want to look out for. Consistent carbohydrate intake and watching your sodium intake when you're dealing with diabetes or high blood pressure.
Thank you. I have a slight follow-up question again. Renee, I'm going to throw this to you. One of the things that I've learned, and I have certainly heard from the different patients that I've had the pleasure of talking with, is that as adjustments are being made, however slight, to somebody's diet, is that it just doesn't taste good and it's not enjoyable to eat, and things that people once enjoyed about having meals, with a loved one or a friend, that goes away because the food doesn't taste good. So I'm wondering if you can shed some light into, is that permanent? Is that something that people are going to have to deal with? Or how should people approach slightly adjusting their diet so that they're not, not enjoying eating their food?
Absolutely. I love this because one thing that I really encourage individuals to do is hone in on what you find enjoyable in your food. So for example, Thanksgiving's coming up. And if you're like me, you're probably a little bit more excited for the mashed potatoes and the turkey than talking to everybody else. There's the meaning behind that. We have the social interaction and the engagement. So as we age, we may find our tastes change. So if you feel like when you're taking sodium out of things, you're missing a little bit, there's a couple things that you can do. One is using herbs in your seasoning. And while this may seem like pretty black and white, advice, one of the things that's really neat out there are different seasoning blends, and they're called Mrs. Dash. If you've seen them, they come in all kinds of Mexican and Italian, and you'd be surprised. So get adventurous is my first advice. Get adventurous in your seasonings and try to use herbs if you can to get that kick. The second thing is using spicy foods. Oftentimes as we age, sometimes we might not feel that same palatability of certain foods that we used to. So we might want to add a little bit of hot sauce or something that gives it a kick. That can make it more exciting. And the third thing is never tell yourself that you cannot have something. If you genuinely enjoy ice cream, I want you to be able to enjoy that, but perhaps pair it with some nuts so that you're getting some satiety and you're getting that good taste in. So really hone in on what you like, be adventurous, and try to spice things up as much as you can.
I like that. I like that pairing of, something that can give you that sense of fullness, and then with something that, tastes really good, but maybe isn't the most nutrient dense, or things that have like a great deal of nutritious benefit. So I appreciate you elaborating on that a bit. I want to be able to throw this out to the other two panelists related to what things should maybe be avoided if somebody has diabetes or high blood pressure or hypertension. Do either of you have anything to add to what Renee said?
No, the only thing that I would add is sometimes I'm amazed, and this is for folks also, you can have diabetes or you can have pre-diabetes, right? And it's just really important to try to maintain your weight, of course, which I'm sure has already been talked about. So weight or weight loss. And then the only other thing that I would say is doing, and excuse me a second, I apologize, is doing everything you can to avoid things that have high amounts of concentrated sweets. And what I was going to say is sometimes I'm amazed about the fact that people with pre-diabetes will still be drinking regular Coke or orange soda or Mountain Dew or whatever it is. So really try to avoid anything that has concentrated sugar in it.
Thank you. That definitely. Okay, so I'm looking at the time here, and my last question is going to be a bit broad. And it has to do with resources or informational things that are out there that maybe people should be plugged into. So, and I'll give every panelist the chance to weigh in, but there's a lot of information out there. There's a ton of stuff online. There's a ton of stuff in the bookstore. There's a ton of stuff on social media. And one of the things that I've certainly covered throughout my time working with ACCA has been how to filter through, what is not necessarily trustworthy versus things that are really good, trustworthy sources of information. So related to healthy aging, not to say healthy eating, because we don't like to say that, but, holistic eating, what resources exist that are really great go-to places that people can go to find information related to aging well? And Dr. Emerson, let's go to you first about that. Do you have any sort of go-to resources that you would advise people to look to?
Sure. I mean, it's always the ACCA, right? It's always my answer. And it sounds like I'm just pandering to the crowd, but I think going to your local area agency on aging, your local senior centers, your local councils are always a good idea. They're the ones who are kind of in your community. They know you, they can filter a lot of that information or noise for you. Google is a magically lovely thing. It can also be a really terrible thing, right? And that's for all ages. My 7-year-old is being taught in school right now how to use the internet wisely because there's untruths in the internet, which it's hard for even him to grasp. It's hard for any of us to really be able to filter that out. And Jessica's done such a great job of kind of teaching you some of the extensions, like a .gov, .gov, or .org are a little more reputable, right, than a random.com, agehealthy.com or whatever it might be. And usually if it sounds too good to be true, it really is. But it is hard to filter through a lot of that. I think Google is wonderful. You can get some really good quick tips and things you never thought about, but it's hard to filter out the noise. And so for a lot of things, talk to your PCP, talk to your experts in your life to really know what is appropriate and what's not. But if you're in doubt, going to the ACCA is never a bad idea, and talk to the experts that you have in your world. So Jess is a great resource, but there's lots of people who are good resources to help you kind of filter it out, because sometimes on your own, it can get incredibly overwhelming to hit something into Google and to get literally millions sometimes of hits on something. And I love that Don actually encouraged Googling. My doctor's always like, just don't Google, you're going to think you have scurvy. But I don't want to say Googling isn't good, right? There are some really great resources out there, but it takes some energy and some time to really be, what is the phrase? Critical consumers of media, I believe is the phrase that we're using, is being really critical of what you read. Take everything with a grain of salt, low sodium, but really be thoughtful about what you're reading.
Definitely, absolutely. And, you know, like was mentioned before, I have given sort of classes about how to be informed consumers of things that are online. Just because it's online doesn't make it true. And there's a lot of predatory places that will try to get you into their site, and that's not good. And it ends up, you know, sometimes causing a lot of damage. So thank you for highlighting that point. Renee, do you have any sort of go-to resources that you would really love for folks to be aware of and plugged into?
Yes, thanks, Jess. I've got two coming at you. The first is evidence-based nutrition information. You can find this at eatright.org. And if you just do a quick search, that will bring it up for you. This is all through the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. So as you're going through things, especially in the world of nutrition, there's a lot out there. Everything on that site is evidence-based, backed by experts, and will give you a really nice go-to if you have specific questions about sleep or exercise or diabetes. There's a lot of great resources. So eatright.org. The second is our Aging and Disability Resource Connection. So across the state of Georgia, of course, you all are with ACCA, but perhaps if you relocate, the Aging and Disability Resource Connection is what we call a no wrong door system. So you can call this phone number, tell them what you need. Hey, I'm having trouble with my utilities. I want to learn how to eat right. My mom seems like she's acting a little bit differently. And they will connect you to the resources you need. And I want to just add this plug that right now, open enrollment is happening for Medicare. So they can also connect you to our Georgia Cares line, which is free, evidence-based information on what you can do to choose a Medicare plan. So eatright.org and 1-866-55-AGING.
Thank you for that. And just for folks, just rest assured, don't worry, we will be sending you all of that information. I'll be following up with everybody after this call, so you will get access to that. So if you didn't get a chance to write that down, no worries. In the couple minutes that we have left, Dr. Scott, do you have any go-to recommended resources that people should be aware of or plugged into?
Yeah, sure. And so I just want to give you one. That's the American Geriatrics Society. So this is the medical organization that is the #1 geriatrics organization in the United States. And they have all kinds of information for patients, for families. And again, I'm sure that Jessica can provide the link for you. But again, if you do have a computer and are able to navigate the web, if you Google American Geriatrics Society, that website has a section that is specific for information for patients and families on a whole range of topics.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yes, we will be sending that information out to everybody, whether or not you were able to be on this call or not. You will be getting all the information, and as well as the questions that were asked and the answers. That does bring us right to the end of our panel time. I am so thankful to each panelist for taking the time to be here with ACCA today. Aging and doing it in a healthy way is so confusing and can be really a scary topic for many people. So I sincerely appreciate each of you weighing in, offering your expertise and advice to the folks on this call. We really appreciate it. And that is all that I have on my end. Again, thank you all so much. Anna or Marla, if there's anything that you would like to jump in and add, if there's any housekeeping things that I maybe forgot to mention at the very beginning, please do so. But those are all of my questions, and I do not have anything else to add to this panel.
I just want to echo everything that you just said, Jessica. Thank you so much to Kirsten and Renee and Dawn. This has been such an informative panel, and we've gotten so many, so great of information and resources. So I just want to thank you all. And thank you to all the attendees for kind of joining us today. Like Jessica said, we'll be sending that information out to you. But if you have any further questions, or if me and Marla can assist you in sort of navigating some of these things, please give us a call. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful day and enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.